What is up, guys? Frosty Osty here today for another Frosty Features. Today's feature is our second member of Orcus that we're talking about. We are talking about the Ultimate Sentinel, Nimrod. If you haven't seen this, what this is a comic book background on the tunes that you use in Marvel Strike Force, and I will take you through the pages of comic books past. Let's get started. So, starting out, we will be, this is the lore blog that Scopely provides to kind of, put out, a background of the character, so we will read this and rate this at the end of the feature. Nimrod. In a dystopian future timeline where Sentinels rule North America, Nimrod was designed to be the ultimate mutant hunter. It possessed superior strength, near invincible durability, and a sophisticated AI that could analyze and counteract mutant powers in real time. Its relentless pursuit and near unstoppable power forced the remaining mutants into hiding, turning every encounter into a desperate fight for survival. Now, we will rate this at the end, but that's what it has to say. What does Frosty has to say? This is Nimrod from the comics. This is what he originally looked like. It has changed since then, especially as art styles have shifted, right? Name, Nimrod, that is his name. Important thing that's gonna affect our blog post, oddly enough. This Nimrod is from Earth 811, Earth 811. So, this is the Days of Future Past timeline. In Frosty Features, we typically stick to the Earth 616 canon. We'll talk about the Nimrod of Earth 616, but Nimrod of Earth 616 is not from a dystopian future, as described by the Scopely blog post, if you see where I'm going with this. So, the main Nimrod in 616 continuity is actually from Earth 811, the one from Days of Future Past. First appearance, Uncanny X-Men number 191 in 1984. Powers and abilities. He is superhuman in every way. Super speed, super strength, etc. Adaptability. The main thing that he can do is he will adapt to situations to be able to respond to various mutations that may come up against him. Energy projection, so a concussive blasts, force fields, etc. Intangibility. He can kind of pull a Kitty Pryde and phase through things to avoid attacks, etc. And more, namely plot armor, right? So anything he needs to be able to get around the situation. The main thing about Nimrod is so Sentinels essentially are mutant fodder, right? Like, they're there to slow the mutants down, and the mutants are able, all you do is throw a Wolverine at a Sentinel and it's done, right? Nimrod is the Sentinel that does not work for, right? You can throw all sorts of Wolverines at a Nimrod and it will not do anything, right? So it's something to keep in mind as we move forward through the future. Aliases, Bastion, technically. Nicholas Hunter and Oracle. So Nimrod, he can change his shape, etc. So he does. There's a stint where he pretends to be somebody named Nicholas Hunter. Bastion is a character that we have spoken about in the MSF community a few times. That it would make more sense to see Bastion on the field or to get him in game. Bastion is essentially a fusion of Master Mold, another character that we should have gotten in game. If you watch Frosty Feature Sentinel, I point out that Sentinel essentially acts as Master Mold in MSF, so it almost would have made more sense to put Master Mold into MSF and have Sentinel summoned, like Sentinel already does. So, another thing that could have been cool, if there was some sort of charge mechanic where if you have Master Mold and Nimrod on the field, some sort of charge mechanic can go through and they combine and become Bastion, which might be kind of neat. So then you're kind of required to rush Orcus, or, in the late game, they can kind of overcome you. That would have been a really cool mechanic that we don't currently have in Marvel Strike Force, but instead, we put a regular Sentinel acting like Master Mold in, and we're putting an Omega level threat in the terms of the Marvel Universe in as like a regular character that you just unlock any other way, and by any other way I mean in this horrible orb release method as of this date, right? But keep in mind, we could have done cooler things, but who wants to be original? Well, we could just rush everything out. Moving on. Affiliations, Purifiers, and Sentinels. This version of Nimrod has nothing to do with Orcus. So if you watch one of our previous Frosty features, so Frosty features Sentinel, when I talk about essentially how Orcus operates, once again, there is a Nimrod that is affiliated with Orcus. It is not this one. Yeah. But this one is more closely associated with the Purifiers, but for the most part, Nimrod kind of works on his own. Background. This is an American-made prototype from the future, right? So like I said, it's from the Days of Future Past storyline. He is not from the arc of Days of Future Past. He is not from those stories. He does not show up. What we have in those stories are just Sentinels. This is after Days of Future Past that we actually see Nimrod, and it's sort of the story where Nimrod kind of comes from is sort of a follow-up to Days of Future Past, and it references back to Days of Future Past, and it brings up specifically the events from this arc. I keep repeating, but so he's from the timeline, but he's not from that story. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind if you're interested in going back and reading, because obviously, if you're looking at different comic book recommendations, reading Days of Future Past is heavily recommended all over the place because it was such a monumental. It literally changed the course of comics, as it were. He is not in it. He just happens to be from the same timeline, right? Which Marvel does a lot. Who died? Can't be a superhero, supervillain without somebody dying. And in his situation, we're in the Days of Future Past future, which means in this future, mutants have essentially been eradicated almost entirely. They've been hunted down by various versions of Sentinels, and through this trying to prevent mutant uprisings and things like that in this tyrannical future, the push to further advance Sentinels, so it's called Project Nimrod, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but where we get Nimrod is from somebody trying to sabotage this project. And ultimately, without the death and reinvigoration of like developing Sentinels, Nimrod would never have existed. So ultimately, just a multitude of mutants died for Nimrod to thrive. Nimrod the Hunter. So unlike Green Day's album Nimrod and the childish derogatory term Nimrod, referring to someone being an idiot, Nimrod is actually named after the biblical character who essentially is Nimrod, meaning hunter. It was probably they probably thought they were pretty clever until this became an insult, talking about someone's intelligence, which kind of undermines the actual. It really kind of like. It really undermines the actual effect of the character himself, because he is that big of a deal and he is that great of a threat. But having a name like that, especially in the current context, he needs. If you watch Frosty Features Nemesis, he needs a Nemesis treatment where they just give him a new name. Honestly, multiple timelines creates continuity issues. So even with because as I've already kind of hinted at, right? There is a 616 Nimrod, and then there's Earth 811 Nimrod. There's so many Nimrods in Marvel continuity that they kind of come out. And it's funny, too, because Nimrod really isn't Ultimus, right? So Ultimus is essentially, he's a electrical consciousness, if you will. Nimrod isn't. Nimrod is a type of Sentinel that can be made and remade, right? He doesn't have to be special, but he is. So he is essentially one robot. He isn't like an electrical consciousness. So when you see multiple Nimrods, it actually is a different Nimrod. It very much is a type of Sentinel that is created. And we see this a lot in Second Coming, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. But if you read through the different storylines that Nimrod might be around, each Nimrod might be there's certain lines you have to be very careful looking up, like reading recommendations, things like that for Nimrod, so that you can actually follow a storyline of a single Nimrod. And honestly, spoiler alert, that's what MSF has messed up. They confused multiple Nimrods and put them together like they have done in the past. Somebody didn't do their research, and as much as you want to say, you could say it's MSF lore or not, they also go back and correct themselves, right? So They're referencing comics that they didn't read. Like me. And relationships. So Bolivar Trask creating the first Sentinel essentially is like the grandfather or great-grandfather of Nimrod, if you want to kind of go that way. All Sentinels, once again, Nimrod is an improved version of Sentinels. So, you know, sort of a progeny kind of situation. Omega Sentinel related directly to Nimrod, and if we read this sort of Fall of X storyline where we have Orcus, and if we read that, there's a lot of interaction between Nimrod and Omega Sentinel. And then, of course, Bastion is his fused progeny, so it's Master Mold and Nimrod put together. It's sort of that next step. So you can say that Nimrod is Bastion. You could also say that Bastion is the product of Nimrod. So it's sort of wishy-washy there because obviously this is a non-organic being, and the way that it moves on and forward, it you know, recycled parts and stuff. It's a little harder to define in our classic ways, right? Notable events. So, especially with characters like this, we want to talk about Origin. So, real quick, 2 notable events I'm going to go over. Origin and X-Men Second Coming. If you watch Frosty Features Sentinel, I go over pretty much the entire Orcus situation. And then when we do Frosty Features Omega Sentinel next time, we will go over this this one gap that Marvel Strike Force is trying to reference. But in that, there's a big gap in time, right? So the 2 things I'm bringing up today are 2 major Nimrod events that involve the Nimrod that they reference in the blog post, right? So, and we'll get into that a little bit on the actual rating of the blog post. But Origin. So what we have, we are in Earth 811. Or Earth 811. This is Days of Future Past. Once again, this is after Days of Future Past. The events of Days of Future Past are over. Essentially, the problem is toppled, and they're trying to rebuild mutant kind and humanity, etc. And the Sentinels are situation. They've created this thing called Project Nimrod, and we have Kate Pryde, which is the adult version of Kitty Pryde, and Rachel Summers, who is a Scott and Jean Grey child from the Days of Future Past storyline, who are trying to shut down this Project Nimrod. They hear it's a big deal, bad thing. So they hop up into this facility and they're like, yo, this is the Nimrod location. Let's sabotage this mug. And then the location's like, okay, sabotage this mug. And then they sabotage the mug. That's the story. But in doing so, the one Nimrod that was created from the project starts to track them down. So, Kitty Pryde, for those of you who may or may not know, has a phasing ability, and in this situation, they find themselves in a room where she cannot phase out. So what she does is she recognizes that there's going to be this large problem, and Nimrod has her and Rachel cornered, and so Kitty essentially hits Rachel with some sort of teleportation, and this is sort of how Days of Future Past works anyway, but essentially sends her back in time to save her life, because at that point, Nimrod just straight up destroys her in a real bad way. Also with that, there's a little gap of time that I actually covered in Frosty Features Forge. So if you go back and watch that, I talk about Nimrod. That's the first time I talked about Nimrod in one of the Frosty Features. There's a really interesting thing where Forge and Nimrod have kind of this interaction that is pretty kind of cool in between here. But ultimately, Nimrod is prime directive to save humanity, to protect humanity from the evil scourge that is mutants, what have you. So he tries to follow this Rachel Summers back to the past. He overshoots and he goes into a different universe. This is where timelines get a little sketchy. But ultimately, if we follow the 811, he goes from dystopian future to the 616, following Rachel Summers, and he appears in the middle of he's in a subway, and he appears and he sees this guy, Jamie Rodriguez, getting mugged, and he's like, hey, I'm AI and I'm super smart. I'm gonna use my intelligence scanner. Bleep, 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 bleep. That guy's in danger. He's a human. I should protect him. The other human is obviously endangering humanity, so F it. So he incinerates the robber, you know, being the hero that he is, He incinerates the robber. This is how you know this was written in the 80s, by the way. This whole thing is really wonky, right? So he incinerates the robber, and Jamie Rodriguez is like, yo, dude, thanks for that. I appreciate you, giant robot man. How about you come live with me? So they go back to his house, and they're hanging out, him just being a giant, scary sentinel thing. Also, remember, this is in days before the internet was like a big thing. So a lot of things that I'm going to talk about that Nimrod is doing at Jamie Rodriguez's house is how wireless internet wasn't a thing, right? Like they had internet, but it was much more limited than what we have obviously today. So his use of internet's really weird, especially being such an advanced AI. But anyway, so with that, Rachel Summers, she comes. Oh yeah, sorry, I almost forgot something. When they're in the subway, he's trying to figure out what his directive in this new space should be. He could be in a universe where there are no mutants, so he's trying to figure out what his directive is in the spot. Once again, Nimrod's whole thing is adaptability. So he scans the area and he finds a poster of Dazzler. It's one of her movie posters, and somebody has spray painted on it, and he determines that mutants are evil, so he does need to still eradicate mutants in this timeline. Let's see. So Nimrod and Jamie go back to Jamie's house, and Nimrod's like, hey Jamie, can I use your computer? And Jamie's like, yeah, sure. So Nimrod uses the computer to research how the mutant human interaction is working in this universe, and he's trying to fill in the gaps, get rid of the culture shock, and understand what's going on as far as that relationship works in this situation. And then on TV, he sees that somebody has spotted Juggernaut at a bank, and also he sees the thing about the X-Men being felons on a news cast. So he very much is like, oh well, obviously I need to go deal with this situation. So off to the bank. So what we find here is Rachel Summers has been messing around with the X-Men for a while Nimrod's just been surfing the internet at Jamie Rodriguez's house. They had a sleepover, pillow fights, etc. The X-Men hear that Juggernaut's at this bank, so they go to kind of check it out, but they kind of they're not. It's kind of weird that they automatically went on that, especially when there's no like big red alerts, but I think the whole point is that people are just kind of afraid, so they reported it. X-Men show up, they're looking at the bank, and legitimately Juggernaut's like in there being a guy. He's like being a dude. He went in there and he's just like, I'm giant, I'm scary, but I need to make a withdrawal, right? He's not robbing the bank, he's not threatening anybody, he's just doing his thing. So they're like, okay, well, we'll stay here just in case he decides to act out, but like, he's chill right now, so that's fine. And Nimrod, literally, he flies in and he's like, F this bank, and he blows up the front wall of the bank, sending stuff everywhere, and Rachel Summers and Kitty Pryde are pretty close to the explosion, so energy force field protection, and Nimrod immediately he jumps in and he just starts trying to beat the crap out of Juggernaut. And it becomes this big fist fight thing, and Wolverine's like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm leading this section of the X-Men. Juggernaut wasn't doing anything wrong. Let's fight Nimrod. And he's like, Colossus, fastball special, let's do this. So for those of you who don't know what a fastball special is, it's important. It's one of the most iconic things in comic books, and they recreated it in one of the X-Men movies, but it's when Colossus picks up Wolverine and throws Wolverine at somebody. So Nimrod's like full on like against Juggernaut, just straight up boxing him, and Colossus throws Wolverine. He's like, let's attack, throw me, and Colossus throws Wolverine at him, and by the time Wolverine flies through the air and gets him, this is one of the first times we see that this fastball special be completely and utterly useless, because Nimrod essentially turns around and just shame slaps Wolverine across the battlefield, right? Wolverine's not down to play or Nimrod's not down to play no crap, right? When it comes to these sorts of things, he will automatically adapt to whatever the mutation is. So in this fact, first off, that he's fighting Juggernaut, who's not a mutant. This is before that was canon in the comics, right? So it still counts. Ultimately, though, the entirety of the X-Men are going against Nimrod, and they pretty much, and Juggernaut, and they pretty much get all wiped out. They're all knocked out. They're all KO'd. Nobody's dead yet. This is the 80s. They didn't die quite as often. It's everybody's on the ground and Rogue's standing there and is like, this doesn't look good. But Juggernaut was able to hold him off, and it looked like we could have maybe damaged him if we would have done this a little bit differently. What if I absorb everybody's powers? So everybody's like knocked down on the ground, so she starts running around and she's like touching people on the ground, because you know that's how Rogue works. She's got to touch them. So just imagine, if you will, everybody's getting knocked out. She's just standing there for some reason. Also, this is Carol Danvers empowered Rogue, so remember she has super strength, super speed, etc. baseline. So she starts running around and touching people. I mean that. So she's running around touching people. Carol Danvers powers, Kitty Pryde powers, Wolverine, Colossus, and Nightcrawler all together, and she's like, I'm gonna be Ultimate X-Woman, and I'm gonna beat the crap out of this Nimrod. And she runs over to him and uses all the powers at once. He's not able to quite figure. He's used to work, because mutants, one of their big thing is they more or less, for the most part, have that kind of one power. And Nimrod even references at one point that Omega level mutants are at the same strength as Nimrod. So a lot of the time when we see multiple mutations from, they climb in that rank. And so when they have like a multitude of powers or overwhelming power, they're kind of at that Omega level. So it is possible for an Omega level mutant to 1v1 a Nimrod. Nimrod even says that to make it canon. So in absorbing all these people, Rogue is easily at this Omega level, and she just absolutely and utterly decimates this Nimrod. And she's picking up her friends. She's like, oh, I was able to do it. It's great. Blah, 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 blah. And then he literally rebuilds himself, and he's like, you're pretty strong. I'm out of here, though. I used all my energy fighting you, but watch out in the future, right? And he leaves. And this is the first time we ever see, Origin, this is the first time we ever see Nimrod. That's the first story he's ever involved in. And then he being broken, rebuilt, going back to different timelines, back and forth, all this stuff with Rachel Summers. We see him a little bit more, but that's sort of the origin I wanted to go over. But it's kind of a fun little neat story, and it mirrors heavily into X-Men Second Coming. So in X-Men Second Coming, what we're finding is post M-Day. So for those of you who may or may not be savvy to big milestones in Marvel Comics, most of the time when you have a big milestone, the milestone hinges off of an X-Men event. So M-Day essentially is, there's a situation where Scarlet Witch, she gets very agitated and she goes, no more mutants. And then in the main Marvel 616 canon, she wipes out all but 200 mutants. They were just able to kind of survive the spell or whatever, and they all get killed, whatever. So in Second Coming, we are on the other end of M-Day. It hasn't been redone yet, but it is sort of the beginning of them trying to come back. So, and this is also following Messiah Complex and a bunch of stuff. Ultimately, there is this line of X-Men comics that are extraordinarily complicated to follow unless you're like me and you read a crap ton of comics, right? But with Second Coming, we have a really interesting situation because the main antagonist of Second Coming is Bastion, right? So Bastion equals Nimrod. So with that, it's it is also further proof from what I said earlier about Nimrod just being a version of Sentinel. That's why I wanted to talk about it. It's just kind of interesting, and also I just think the artwork is really sick. So what we have here are this is M-Day happens. There are only a few mutants left, and then the humans essentially put together a bunch of, so like I would talk about the Purifiers earlier. Purifiers are involved in this. So there's Purifiers. There's just a bunch of different teams outside, even not just the Purifiers, but think about like SHIELD and AIM and stuff like that. And at this time, Norman Osborn's the head of SHIELD, right? So there's literally just these organizations that are just hunting and killing mutants, and there's only 200 of them left, right? I think you can even find a list somewhere of all 200. And so these different groups are getting together. Very much think of it like Mad Max, and they're tracking people down, and they're trying to kill mutants. Xavier School is decimated, Xavier School being in New York. And then we have Planet M, or Asteroid M, was a sort of haven. It was like Magneto's base of operations during M-Day and things like that. It has crashed in the Bay of San Francisco and has become this place called Utopia. It's essentially its early version Krakoa. It is an island that is a safe place for mutants in San Francisco. This is important. Second Coming, a lot of it is traveling, right? So what we find is we're using different mutants that have teleportation abilities, and we watch them all die, right? Because they're trying to make the travel harder. so that they can pick them off. Think it's like a really bloody Oregon Trail. They're trying to knock people out as they travel across the United States. It's kind of a neat storyline, honestly, but it's really, the thing with it, it's really complicated, so you gotta be really careful reading it, right? So with that, we have, so also big part of this is Hope Summers' birth. Cable takes her to the future to bring her back, but she has not developed her mutant abilities just yet. So that's another big thing. So ultimately, Hope and Cable are back in the 616. They're trying to get to San Francisco from New York. So they're traveling, and the Purifiers are tracking them down, but the X-Men are also tracking them down. So the X-Men show up, and one section of the X-Men grab Hope, and they're trying to teleport her to Utopia, and the other section is there, like Wolverine and such, to distract the Purifiers. So with this, Nightcrawler grabs Rogue and Hope, and they're bamfing and they're moving and they're bamfing, right? So in the midst of their bamfing, they're trying to get to safety, and one bamf too many, they get into a situation, and all of a sudden standing in front of them is Bastion. So Bastion, being the fused product of Nimrod and Master Mold, is standing there in all his badassness. I mean, really check him out. He's super cool. But Bastion's kind of standing there, and he's like, yeah, this is gonna go poorly for you. And Rogue's like, no, I know how to do this. So in this situation, I actually just got ahead of myself. Bastion's there first. We still have like Wolverine and stuff around her. So Rogue starts collecting powers like she did against Nimrod, all right? So this is the reflection. The Second Coming also likes to it reflects on everything. It shows stuff from Days of Future Past. It even shows like old bits. But so she's like, I know how to handle this. I'm gonna start touching people again, right? It's been a while, been a couple of years, about 20 years or so. I'm gonna start touching people. So she runs around, she starts touching people. So this time, she bothers to get Wolverine, Colossus, Angel, who at this time was Archangel style, so think more metally. Psylocke and X-23, which touching Wolverine and X-23 is the same thing, but she did it. It's canon. So anyway, she becomes really powerful X-person and is looking all crazy with her bone claws and such. And she goes up against Bastion, and Bastion's like, you are weak as heck. What are you doing? You cannot even think to stand up to me. And essentially is like, I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill Hope. And there's nothing you can do about it. And Nightcrawler's like, this isn't good. And he bamfs. He's about to kill Rogue. He's like, Bastion's holding her. And Nightcrawler says, bamf, right in the middle of his arm. And grabs Hope and Rogue, and then bamps one more time, kind of off to safety, more or less. And in doing so, rips off Bastion's arm. And but Nightcrawler, being Nightcrawler, is not very good at being impaled. So he's got a whole Bastion's arm sticking through him. And he's lying on the beach, and they're like, "Oh my God, Nightcrawler!" And he's like, "I'm dead, bye, bleh," and he dies. And so, there's a big reaction that nobody really cares. And so what they keep doing is every time, so he's the first teleporter to die, he's the most famous teleporter, they send another one, and essentially, as they keep going, the Purifiers and Bastion are targeting the teleporters that limit this transportation. So, as it ends up working, all the teleporters, if they show up in Second Coming, they end up dying. That's just sort of what it is. But ultimately, Bastion comes up with a new plan, and he's like, let's let them all get to Utopia. That sounds like a great idea. So he ends up letting them go. Everybody gets to Utopia, and then Bastion's like, giant red bubble of force field. So he creates this, if you look in the picture that I've got posted here, in the background is red. He creates this giant red energy bubble that traps them in there. And what he does is he goes to the Days of Future Past storyline. He reopens Project Nimrod, and he starts mass producing Nimrods. This is where Nimrod comes in. Bastion still sort of counts, but this is where Nimrod comes in, right? So it like Sentinels are mass produced, we have Nimrods mass produced, and all of the remaining 200, whatever's left after all the deaths and things like that. So there's 100 and something mutants are on Utopia, and essentially nothing can go out, and the only thing coming in is wave after wave of Nimrods, just army of Nimrods running in, and it's almost impossible. Like, mutants are dropping left and right, and they're doing what they can. Luckily, there's a bunch of Omega mutants kind of put together, but ultimately it is a constant struggle, and they're getting beaten down. It's like an endless wave after wave after wave. They're getting beaten down. They're starting to lose hope, and so Cable is like, yo, I've been doing all this time traveling the last couple years. I have one more charge. I can take me and a group of us. He ended up choosing X-Force, and they group together and they poof into the future, and they're like, we're gonna go take down Project Nimrod. And they get there and they see the Days of Future Past wall that shows off the apprehended mutants and stuff like that. It's really no reason other than to be like, this is the reality we're in. But they went up in there and they end Project Nimrod from that side, cutting off the base of the Nimrods, just kind of flying in. Oh, also another thing I wanted to point out. There's a really interesting mutant named Legion. It's Charles Xavier's son, who has all these different powers. They become so desperate that Charles unleashes Legion on the waves and waves. Talk about an Omega level mutant. On the waves and waves of Nimrod. So legitimately, he like runs in there and like throws his son out of a helicopter, and he's like, kill them, son. And Legion's out there just like slaying Nimrods, right? Which is kind of crazy. But so ultimately, the bubble is destroyed. The waves and waves of Nimrods are stopped because of X-Force's situation in the past, but they're in the future, and they're stuck there. But they find a way to get everybody back, right? Which doesn't make sense at all. It's a whole thing about opening a portal that only inorganic material can phase through. So Cable's like, techno-organic virus, another big thing for Days of Future Past. That's why they go back in time. We talked about it in Frosty Features Magic way back in the day. Ultimately, it is a virus that slowly turns you into a robot, but you're not like a living robot, and you die from it. And Cable's able to keep his off because of just kind of like his Jesus powers. So he lets it go. He becomes fully robotic or whatever, so he can open up this portal. And for some reason, it lets everybody through. So I like to think that it just needed something inorganic to hold it open. But all of X-Force is able to get through, and he looks at Hope, and Hope's like, you were my adopted father. You raised me, and it was awesome. Please don't die. And he's like, but I gotta die for the plot. Blah. And then he dies, and he gets broken apart. And Hope's like, ah, you suck, dude. And she, you know, my dad's dead. Bastion, what are you doing? And Bastion flies in, and he's like, hey, little kid, I'm here to kill you. And she's like, not today. You know, so she all of a sudden is like, manifest mutant powers, go. And so Hope is essentially like Jean Grey on steroids, and so she's able to just rip Bastion to pieces and end it all right there. And then the whole thing ends with it being implied that she has aspects of the Phoenix Force, and everybody's freaking out, right? Which kind of leads to Avengers vs. X-Men, right? So, but I said that. Avengers vs. X-Men happens when Hope is a baby. I'm wrong. But it all has to do with people being worried that the Phoenix Force is coming back. Anyway, that's X-Men Second Coming. It's another interesting thing with Nimrods just being mass-produced, and still from 8/11. After Second Coming is when we see the Orcus situation where they recreate Nimrod, and like I said, we'll talk about that more in Frosty Features on Mega Sentinel, and then also watch Frosty Features Sentinel to kind of hear about how that Orcus relationship works. So with that, moving on, Marvel Strike Force doesn't care about power levels, but here at Frosty Features we do. Now the way that this works, a multiversal threat means you can end all of realities, not just yours, but the whole multiverse at a whim. Universal means that you can end your reality, and then maybe hop on over to another reality and end that one. Cosmic means you have a threat on a planetary scale, leveling things like a small planetary body all the way up to something like a galaxy or a solar system with enough time. Nuclear means you have power equivalent to that of a nuclear bomb, leveling things like small cities or a small planetary body, once again with enough effort. Super Soldier means you have abilities beyond all capabilities of humanity, taking out things like brick walls or city blocks at the high end. City means that you are maybe a human being equivalent, trained to the absolute and utter peak level. So think Olympic athlete. In Marvel, we have a lot of our secret agents, our spies, our ninjas, and things like that sitting at this city level. And then there's Greg. Greg is the undead Asgardian that is spawned by Hela in Marvel Strike Force, and without an Undying team, without a Hela, and left to his own devices, Greg is not strong in the slightest. So In the event that I, regular human being Frosty, am out feeding ducks, throwing bread out to these ducks in at a pond, and Greg is across the pond, and he's got a fishing rod, and he's throwing this out, and he catches one of the ducks by the neck, and I cut that duck free, and then I run over there with my knife and it becomes a Greg Frosty free-for-all. I theoretically, as a regular human being, could take out Greg. So, due to undead Asgardian physiology, just because I like to make the argument, Greg is equivalent to that of a regular average human being. So, in the case of Nimrod, we have a sentinel that is essentially built to peak strength, peak level. In the case of Nimrod, we have a being easily at a cosmic level. He can adapt and take on things all the way up to Omega level mutants, and many Omega level mutants are at a universal rank. The thing is typically Omega level mutants are kind of what are required to defeat a Nimrod. So he definitely is at the higher end of cosmic, which means a character like maybe a really good baseline for cosmic is Thor. Thor would struggle heavily to defeat a Nimrod on his own, right? So these are the important things that we need to consider. As far as this is concerned, we talk about a dystopian future, but then we're talking about how Nimrod is designed in a dystopian future, and then he is used he's used. Actually, it doesn't even reference Orcus at all, right? So, in the event of Nimrod's use of Orcus, Nimrod Earth 811, he is built in a dystopian future. He comes back, and then we have him interacting there, and then later in the timeline, Orcus comes together and is creating Omega Sentinel and all these new robots and things like that, and they are basing a new Nimrod, so this is Nimrod 616, off of some of these this older one that was built, like pieces and like memories and videos of this old Nimrod. So they make a new version of Nimrod that has never existed in any way, shape, or form in a dystopian future. But it seems like maybe we didn't recognize that, and they got it twisted. They just kind of they found what they can Google really fast and throw one of these together. It's been a while. Honestly, Scopely's really been on it with these blog posts. This is the first one where I found, as I read it, I was like, that's not even close. They just mixed a bunch of stuff up, right? Once again, this right here is where you can make the argument that it is establishing new lore, but because it is an Orcus team, because it is Nimrod and referencing this dystopian future, they are referencing comics. So in MSF lore, it can be said that this is correct, but from what they're pulling from, they just mishmash some stuff together and made it out. They got it twisted. It's fine, right? It is okay. That is how the multiverse works. So with that was Frosty Features Nimrod. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Please let me know your favorite Nimrod moments, Green Day or comic book, in the comments below. Also, please let me know if I got anything wrong. I would love to hear it. It's totally fine. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe here on YouTube, where it doesn't cost you anything but a couple of clicks. And as a reminder, I stream at the link above on Twitch Sundays at 8 a.m. Central Standard Time, where we do Frosty Features live. I hope that you all enjoyed this. I hope that you all have a fantastic week. And most importantly, all, stay cool.